Good morning, those of you who are in the United States and this hemisphere, and good afternoon or good evening for those who are in Georgia or in other parts of the world. My name is Mamuka Tsereteli. I'm a head of America-Georgia Business Council, and I would like to welcome you all to this second session of America-Georgia Business Council's 24th annual conference. About 2 weeks ago, we had our first session focusing on strategic priorities and macroeconomic development of Georgian economy. We also celebrated opening of American Hospital in Tbilisi, and we had a very interesting interview with newly joined member of America-Georgia Business Council and the world's leading IT company, EPAM, who has now hundreds of employees in Georgia and grows its business in Georgia, which we are very happy about. And I also need to mention probably that 2 days ago, we hosted as America-Georgia Business Council, fourth Reno Forum of America in Philadelphia's University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology, where we had a great discussion about not only history of Georgian wine, but also modern day winemaking and business of wine and strategy of penetration of Georgian wine to the United States, and great presentations about business of wine in Georgia. But today we have a very special session, very dear to me, to my heart, energy security focused discussion. We call it Evolving Energy Security of Georgia. And I'll explain why we call it this way in a second, but I wanted to say that America-Georgia Business Council actually started in 1998 with the help of energy companies and focusing mostly on energy business. And what is today BP, at that point was represented as a founding company of Amoco and Arco of America-Georgia Business Council, and soon after BP joined as well. And then many other energy companies. We were involved not only in a pipeline projects development in Georgia, but also helping AES Corporation during their first years of operation in Georgia. Actually, until to the end of their time in Georgia, 2003, we were very involved in the process of facilitating their activities in Georgia. Unfortunately, we all failed to keep them in Georgia, and but they left significant footprint in Georgian economy, in my opinion. And I think from that time, from the late 80s and early 2000s, Georgia faced significant challenges for its energy security, but gradually with the development of Caspian energy resources, with the increased production of natural gas and Georgia being gas transit with the help of BP and others, Georgia actually managed to, at least on that side, natural gas side, reach diversity of supply and secure supply line, and managed to avoid any complications of related to political tensions with our northern neighbor, Russia. And gradually actually achieved stability and sustainability of energy system. We all know the Georgian economy, despite all the problems that surround Georgia, internally, externally, Georgia's economy is growing and energy consumption is growing. But I think we are seeing process when energy production and generation of electricity in particular is not in par with the growth of demand, which increases Georgia's dependency on import. And that creates some challenges. Maybe I'm wrong in my assumption. And our distinguished speakers today and a very diverse group of speakers from different policymaking or investment community or scholars will try to answer this question both directly and indirectly, where Georgia stands in terms of its energy security. So we'll start our discussion and presentations with Mr. Nugzar Haindrava. Unfortunately, today, head of Georgian Energy Development Fund, Mr. Georgi Chikovan, couldn't make it, but he dispatched his deputy, Mr. Haindrava, to be with us. And he will focus a little bit on the policy side, where Georgia's kind of focus on energy and power generation, and also integration to different systems stands at this point, and also maybe some particular specific projects. Then we move to Ms. Rusudan Medzmariashvili, who is the External Affairs Chief at the BP office in Georgia, part of the BP Caspian Group. Although she's very young, she's still veteran of Georgian energy landscape, been with BP for more than 2 decades. Then we'll move to Mr. Georgi Vakhtangishvili, who is the CEO of Georgian Utility Group, and who has private sector experience in investments in Georgia, and we definitely are very interested to hear the business side of the story. Then Mr. David Managadze, also experienced energy professional with EBRD for long experience in this field, and head of EBRD's Caucasus energy practice. And then we'll move to Mr. William Fisher from APR Energy. Will has a global experience in developing power generation facilities, and he's the head of now Eurasia practice at APR. And he will share his views about how and where he sees Georgia's energy sector developing from private investors' perspective. And we'll ask our friend, Mr. Issa Sabonis, to summarize everybody else's presentations in a sense that she will definitely has his own opinion and expertise, long-time expertise in the region on energy sector. Understanding not just Georgia, but also regional context of Georgia energy sector. But she will share her views about that, but also it will give us all opportunity to summarize where things are. And then we'll go around again and we'll all discuss topics that you raised. So sorry about this long introduction, but that's my duty as a host and organizer of this. And now we'll ask Nugzar to start his presentation. Nugzar, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mamuka. It's a great honor to me to participate in this discussion and tell you a little bit about our energy sector, about reforms which are now in ongoing process, and about some other interesting stuff in the energy sector of Georgia. So as you all know, since 2016, when the association agreement was signed with the EU, Georgia has been progressing in harmonizing its legislation with the EU's relevant energy directives in the energy sector. In this regard, we have approved and enacted several primary legislations, such as law of energy and water supply, law of energy efficiency, law of promotion of production of utilization of energy from renewable sources, law of energy efficiency in buildings, and law of energy labeling. So unfortunately, these laws were not in place several years ago, and now we have developed these laws, and in parallel, there are some secondary legislations upcoming in these reform processes. Also, the main challenge in Georgia for today is that we do not have energy market. But at the end of this year, the energy market will be in place. So all developers and owners of owners of energy production power plants will be able to sell the electricity on this Georgian energy market. So it will give us a possibility to have a clear vision of what is the market price of electricity in Georgia. And I hope that in upcoming years, maybe in 3-4 years, when there will be some track record of the prices, it will give some incentives to develop new projects in energy field of Georgia. So also one of the main challenges for Georgia is that unfortunately our supply of energy does not meet demand on the energy, especially in the winter period, when hydro potential of Georgia is not as high as in other seasons, because as you might know that Georgia is mostly hydro country. So in the winter, when water level is low, we have to import electricity from our neighborhood countries, or thermal power plants are working in our country, and the source as gas is also imported from Azerbaijan in this case. So we as a country are trying to reduce the dependence on the import. So we see that the best way to fulfill this gap is the development of renewables such as wind and solar. So last maybe 5 years in Georgia, there is quite active development of renewables such as wind and solar. We, as a Georgian Development Energy Fund, with the help of EBRD, have constructed first wind power plant in Georgia several years ago, and it was a pilot project which showed that it's possible for Georgia to develop such projects. And nowadays, up to 300 megawatt wind projects are in ready to build phase. So these developers at this moment are negotiating with the government some terms of implementation agreements, and we hope that at the end of 2022, construction of this 300 megawatts of new wind power plants will be started. And also with the help of EBRD, we are now developing quite interesting project for Georgia. It's 50 megawatt solar power plant project with perspective to tender it out in the maybe end of this year or beginning of next year. So I think that at the end of 2023, we as a country will have extra 350 megawatt of renewables, which will somehow fulfill the gap of import which we have in our country at this moment. Also, Georgia is working on very, I would say, interesting project for our country. It's construction of it's construction of construction of underwater line which will connect Georgia directly with EU. It will connect us with Romania. So it's called project is called Black Sea Submarine Cable Project. So at this moment we are preparing a pre-feasibility study, and we hope that figures will be feasible from technical and from economical point of view. And the project will significantly improve electricity supply reliability in our country. So we will have opportunity to import energy from EU, and also we will be able to export electricity to EU. Because unfortunately at this moment in our region, like in Russia, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, and in Turkey partially, the prices on electricity are not based on LCOE. All of these countries somehow manipulate maybe with the prices, and they are not on a very fair market basis. So as soon as we will connect with EU market, it will be very good for Georgia's energy sector. Also, currently, the National Energy and Climate Integration Plan is being drafted, which will set the targets for Georgia for 2030 in 5 directions, such as energy efficiency, energy security, energy internal energy markets, decarbonization, and research and development of competitiveness. So this plan is under development at this moment, and we hope that at the end of this year we will have first draft, and in 2022 the final document will be in place. And also the plan includes Georgia's long-term vision for 2030-2050 years. Also last like several, maybe 2 or 3 years, we are very actively trying to develop very new energy sector for Georgia. It's development of green hydrogen. We are trying to develop master plan for Georgia to how to develop green hydrogen properly in our country, because we have resources, we have hydro resource, and we can utilize these resources and create as hydrogen, which also can be transported via existing pipelines to European countries. So this project is under priority for us and also for the ministry. And we are now evaluating economical and technical figures of these projects. So it's very briefly about where we are at this moment. So if you will have any specific questions, I'm here to provide some answers.
Great. Thank you, Nuksar. I think it's very great overview of the major directions, and it gives us lots of food for thought and good ground for questions, but also a good framework for the further discussions. But I would like to now ask Rusudan to give her perspective of slightly different aspect of development. It's more about pipelines and Georgia's transit role in energy, but also Georgia's recipient of and beneficiary of definitely of these pipeline projects for domestic purposes as well. Rusudan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mamuka. Let me greet all the participants of the conference. I'm really delighted to have an opportunity to talk here at this conference at this moment, because this year 2021, is very important for us, for BP, because we're celebrating 25 years of BP in Georgia. We're also celebrating 25th anniversary of the Shah Deniz, one of the largest gas discoveries in the Caspian region, which we have developed and are currently operating. And we have also started to pursue our plans in support of BP's new strategy, of which I believe most of you are aware of. This is the net zero, achieving net zero by 2050. And we're also looking for new opportunities in the region in this respect. So I have worked for BP for more than 20 years. And when I look back of what has been achieved in the region and in the country, it really makes me proud. And I just want to briefly touch upon our projects, what we have done in the country, and what benefits these projects have brought to Georgia, and also maybe say a couple of words about our future plans here. So as I said, we started our operations in Georgia in 1996. And we have invested in the region more than $4 billion, and this investment allowed us to create a world-class energy infrastructure, which links the resources in the Caspian Sea to the world markets, and therefore creating the reliable source of supply and diverse source of supply, not only for the countries of the region, but now for the European countries as well. And I'll come to that. But first, let me start that. And I have to mention that by being part of these energy projects in the region, Georgia consolidated its role as an important partner and as a reliable partner and an important player worldwide, I would say. So when I remember those late 90s, when BP first came into the country, it was a very challenging period. We had very ambitious plans to develop the world-class oil pipeline in the country. And it was kind of a test for Georgia, whether Georgia can develop it, whether Georgia can serve as a reliable partner, whether Georgia can serve as a transit country for such a project. And here we are. We built the first project, Baku-Supsa pipeline, which became operational in 1998. Which currently carries up to 150,000 barrels of oil per day to the world market through the Black Sea Supsa terminal. But then, because of the success of this first project, the two bigger projects followed, which is Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, which carries with a capacity of 1.2 million barrels of oil a day, which transports oil from Caspian Sea through Georgia, through Turkey to the world markets. And the another one is the South Caucasus gas pipeline, which again became operational in 2007 and which transports gas through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, and delivers gas to the Turkish distribution system. From the South Caucasus gas pipeline, Georgia receives certain volumes of gas which go into Georgia distribution system as well. But this is not all. Actually, several years ago, we completed stage 2 development of the Shah Deniz. This was a very challenging project, one of the most challenging projects in the industry, I would say. And what does that mean for Georgia? In Georgia, we constructed 63 kilometers of the new pipeline in parallel to the existing one, 2 giant compressor stations and a metering station at the Turkish border. This project, which we call in Georgia South Caucasus Pipeline Expansion Project, allowed Georgia to be linked into the Southern Gas Corridor. Southern Gas Corridor, and I want to show a map here, if I may. Southern Gas Corridor is the pipeline system which delivers gas from Caspian Sea to Europe, to Italy, namely. And you can see, if you see my cursor, it's the pink part is the South Caucasus gas pipeline. Then it goes into the blue TANAP line, and the orange one is the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, which goes to the Italy. So this project has been successfully completed, and from 2020 now Europe is also receiving gas from the Caspian Sea. Therefore, it diversifies the energy supply to Europe, it diversifies energy supply to Georgia as well, and it puts Georgia on the world energy map, which is, I think, a very good thing for our country to be. Of course, this couldn't have been possible, the success couldn't have been possible without the close cooperation of the governments of all the countries in the region, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, but without the support of the international organizations like EBRD and IFC, who served as lending institutions to our pipeline projects, and with the support of other international and national stakeholders with whom we have great working relationships, and who helped us to actually develop these projects, which, in my opinion, not only help to diversify the energy sources for Georgia, but also quite significantly helped to improve the investment climate in the country, and helped country to attract additional foreign investment, because Georgia, through these projects, proved to be a reliable partner and the country that could, where the big international projects can be delivered. Of course, there are Georgia benefits from these pipeline projects, not only directly through receiving gas or through receiving tariff payments for the oil that passes through its territory, but Georgia has received much more because of it. First of all, as I mentioned, it consolidated its role as a reliable partner worldwide, but also locally, apart from our core business, we have invested heavily in social programs. We spent more than $100 million in social programs in Georgia in various directions, whether it's education or environment or supporting business development. I will just bring one example. We have a very long-running community program, for example, which runs since 2003 up to now. This is the program which helps development of the communities along our assets. It changes its forms, it changes its directions based on the, of course, the developments that take place in the society, but still. So one of its components was so successful that the Georgian government got interested and actually copied our model and launched its own program in support of small business development in the country. So we were delighted to serve as a role model in this. Apart from that, we partner with the Paralympic Committee. We spent more than $3 million for preservation of Georgian cultural heritage. There is a lot that we did for supporting local recruitment. We basically encourage all our contractors to recruit locally. And over the 25 years of our operations, we and our contractors, we employed more than 10,000 people. We educated them, gave them the knowledge, and therefore created quite skilled workforce in the country. And also through working with our local contractors, we created quite solid local supply base who works at the international standards, which again, I think is a benefit for the country. Basically, this is our, very in brief, our benefits that our projects brought to the country. And as a conclusion, I just want to demonstrate another map, which, just a second, which shows the role and the, oh my God, that's not it. Yeah, right. So this is it, which shows the place of our regional business, the AGT regional business in BP's global portfolio. As you can see, it's pretty important, and there are some figures on the left, which you can see that we produce 7% of BP's total liquid around the world in the region, and we have invested heavily. More than $81 billion have been invested in the region, which I think demonstrates our commitment to the region. And we have far-reaching goals here. We are developing Caspian resources. We're committed to continue developing of them, but at the same time, we are adapting to the changing world through pursuing new opportunities in terms of looking for other projects in the renewables maybe. So that's basically where we are currently in the region and in Georgia. So this was, I think, brief overview, if I may say, of our activities here in the country. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to respond.
We'll come back to you with the questions, definitely. And as a somebody who watched these developments and somehow in different stages supported these activities, I can confirm that these pipeline projects were, first of all, great strategic projects for Georgia that brought regional collaboration to the different level, collaboration between Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, with US support in 90s and 2000s. And then it also create tremendous capacity building sort of potential and realization of that capacity building in the country. So we'll come back to, I have several questions, and we'll talk about that going forward. Georgi, maybe you'll tell us about your experience now actually doing things in Georgia in a power generation and in the space of electricity mostly, as I understand, but also some other activities.
Thank you, Mamuka. First of all, I would like to welcome the participants, the attendees. I'm glad to be participating, and I would briefly guide you through the overview of Georgia Global Utilities, what we do and who we are. Let me share the screen first. So in brief, I'll guide you through the few slides. So basically, we're solely owned by Georgia Capital. It's a LSE premium listed investment firm, more than 90% of institutional shareholder base. And that the portfolio of Georgia Capital consists of public portfolio and private portfolio, among which water utility part is part of the large portfolio companies, and renewable energy is the part of the investment portfolio at early stage development. From the portfolio companies, we can mention the top-ranking healthcare group, as well the PNC and medical insurance companies. So the fundamental enablers of Georgia Capital is the access to capital, the access to management, and strong corporate governance, and they've been demonstrating this to almost a decade. And the strategy, or the enhanced strategy of Georgia Capital, is to invest in Georgia in large opportunities with the potential to be around $500 million lari plus equity value at the exit. So they invest, they create value, and exit. So now down to earth, Georgia Global Utilities. So basically we have two arms, one being the water utility business and another one, a renewable energy business. Water utility business captures the full cycle of operations for water supply and sanitation. So we provide water supply to the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, and to neighboring cities. We do the collection and wastewater treatment. In addition to that, we serve somewhere around 37,000 commercial customers, 1.4 million individuals, households. We have 150 megawatt installed capacity of hydropower plants. We call them linked to water utility business. And we serve around 4.5 kilometers of water and wastewater network. The key highlights for water utility is that it's a natural monopoly, and there is a national agency which sets the framework for water utility companies. It is regulated and has a fair return. The regulated weighted average cost of capital is somewhere around 15%, which is quite appealing. We have outstanding cash collection rates, somewhere around 95% plus, and we are self-sufficient in terms of electricity generation, since we have the second largest reservoir hydropower plant in Georgia, which is a Genoa hydropower plant. On the renewable energy business, we have operational 91 megawatt installed capacity plants, 70 megawatt go for hydros, and 21 goes for wind farms. It is one and only wind farm in Georgia. And in the pipeline, we have 100 megawatt plus wind farms. I'll talk about it later. And around 64 megawatt installed capacity of pipeline of hydropower plants. So why we are here in renewable energy business in Georgia is that there is an opportunity to establish the largest energy platform, renewable energy platform in Georgia, and capitalize on the favorable market conditions. And as Zar mentioned, the electricity market is being deregulated right now, and market liberalization will bring on additional opportunities here. We build cheaply. We somewhere around $1.5 million per megawatt, which is quite low compared to that of EU countries. There is a high cash flow visibility through the fixed price arrangement of the electricity offload arrangement to the government-backed entity. And also we have natural hedge against the FX risk of the debt that we have, since the arrangements and the entire electricity market in Georgia is fully dollarized. So a few words about the electricity market and the fact that the supply is lagging the demand. So on the first chart, you see that during 10 months throughout the year, we have the deficit. Georgian electricity market is a deficit market. So it used to be 8 months, it's now up to 10. And hopefully it will be 12 soon. So you can see that the light blue area on the first chart is the hydro and wind supply. And basically it's more than 75% of the total total installed capacity of Georgia. And the gray area in dark blue, that's the missing part, which is thermal power plants, which are occasionally covering the deficits as well as the imports. The consumption in Georgia has been increasing somewhere around 5% CAGR during last decade, and it will continue to do so most probably, leaving us with a huge deficit of somewhere around 10 terawatt hours in 10 years. And therefore, that gives us the idea that the prices will be increasing. On the second chart, you see that unfortunately throughout this decade, the increase of the consumption was mostly captured and covered by the imports in electricity, in the form of electricity, as well as imported gas. So they both can be considered as imports. And you can see that last year, electricity negative electricity trade balance was somewhere around $150 million, which is huge. So that's basically the opportunity. As I said, the biggest chunk of the supply in Georgia is the hydropower plants, serving us up to 75% of total supply. And the hydros are peaking in summer months. So in summer months, we have excess, and therefore it doesn't bring much value. However, wind power plants are more evenly distributed throughout the year and can be another solution to this deficit type of structure and consumption. So it has less seasonality in generation, and most of the output from the wind farms are capturing the deficit mass, which is basically the best thing to do in Georgia now. We've been actively developing two locations, which is Tbilisi and Kaspi. It is around 108 megawatt installed capacity, both together, and it's about, it will substitute around $15 million of import of electricity. We are about to invest $150 million, and we will be contributing around $80 million to the country GDP. So we are well advanced in planning stage. So the biggest thing here is the selection of the location and the wind measurement campaign, the securing of necessary permits, ENS and HNS implications, which is a burden monitoring. You are aware of that probably. It's a long story, and we've done that in accordance with the IFC standards. So we've been doing this for a couple of years, and we are ready so we are in the stage of negotiating the terms of the power purchase agreement, the so-called implementation agreement. So as soon as we are done, we are ready to proceed and finalize the turbine selection and construction installation. So we are as advanced as that. So the moment we have the arrangements with regard to the implementation agreement, we are ready to commence. And also on the chart, on the right-hand side, low-hand side, you see that the tariff which is being offered, which for as a fixed tariff for power purchase agreement, which is being negotiated, is not a subsidy actually. It's a market tariff, and it is fixed for 10 to 15 years. And you can see on this chart that in a couple of years the market price will be higher than the fixed tariff for PPA, which brings us to believe that it will not be an additional burden for the country. That's why the best thing to do in Georgia probably is to do the wind farm development. So basically that's it. I will pass the floor to another participant.
Thank you, Georgi. I think it was very interesting and impressive in many ways to see that potential, but also the gap that is in the current supply and dependency on import. That's one of the reasons actually we are having this conversation today. Actually, that stimulated us to organize this panel. But among others, the perspectives that you presented are definitely very impressive and interesting. So we'll move now to our good friend, Mr. David Managadze from EBRD, who will probably give us some of the, it will be probably a blend of policy elements as well as business development in this space. So David, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks Mamuka, and welcome to all participants, panelists, and attendees to the conference. I'm very honored to present and to make presentation about the bank's activities, both investment and policy dialogue, and number of projects and policy dialogue activities actually were mentioned earlier here. So you will see them on the slides as well. Let me share my screen. So briefly about EBRD. EBRD is a AAA rated institution with a 30 billion capital base. We operate in 37 countries, and we are owned by 70 countries and 2 intergovernmental organizations. Our overall cumulative investments throughout establishment of the bank in 1991 is $130 billion. And our portfolio in Georgia is above 3 billion euros. Now about the projects that we finance, renewable energy projects we financed in Georgia. As you can see from this slide, it's throughout the country and in pretty much all regions of the country. The following slides will give more details on some of the projects. And I will give you the reasons why these projects are important from our perspective. Paravani hydropower plant is the first greenfield hydropower plant financed in Georgia. After, I don't know, 80s, after 80s, and this is also important that this is the first greenfield hydropower plant financed by the bank, not only in Georgia, but in all our countries of operation. And the structure of it was structured as a guaranteed loan to the strong sponsor, being the Anadolu Group in Turkey, who is one of the very strong groups in Turkey. And this is their first investment in the hydro. After that, they made several investments in the energy sector in Turkey as well. The next project, also very interesting and important, is Dariali hydropower plant. This is 108 megawatt greenfield hydropower plant, and the project is interesting from various perspectives. First of all, this is the first project of its size that was financed by the bank under limited recourse project finance structure. This is one thing. Another aspect that is very important is that this project is the first project of this size that was developed by Georgian sponsor, and there was a perception that Georgian sponsors are not able, do not have neither financial nor technical capacity to develop projects of this size. And then this is also the first project that was financed not closely by IFIs, but with private participants in financing, where EBRD mobilized the B lenders through a B loan syndication program. And in this particular case, it was FMO and Green for Growth Fund. The project was awarded EMEA Finance Deal of the Year in 2014. And in last year, in March 2020, when pandemic was just started, the TEPCO acquired minority shares in this project. So and they were doing due diligence for several years, as you can imagine, with the full Japanese, so let's say, scrutiny. And after several years of due diligence, they vetted that this project is built in line with world standards and in compliance with all technical, environmental, I don't know, social requirements. The next project is Gori Wind Power Plant that is now owned by GGU, and it was mentioned by both Nurzar and Vakhtang in their presentation. This project is important because it is the first commercial wind power plant in the Caucasus, and it was financed. Also, it is important that it was to know that it was financed when it was state-owned, but it was financed under limited recourse project finance structure. So without sovereign guarantee, it was fully commercial financing. Financing was raised for this project on a commercial basis, and in 2019 it was successfully privatized, and Georgian Global Utilities acquired this asset, and I am sure they are very glad with performance of the asset, because when one of the high level officials from USAID was asked to visit this facility, and when he visited it, his impression was that he directly mentioned that this is the engine of Mercedes in the body of Volkswagen, so something like this, without any how to say, without any I don't know, to Volkswagen or to Mercedes. You know, it was just a quote. The next project is important for us, because we see that there is a huge potential in the country for the development of small and medium-sized projects that are very difficult for IFIs like EBRD to reach directly because of their small size and high costs related to due diligence. For such projects, we have a dedicated facility with local banks and called risk sharing facility. This particular project was financed under the risk sharing facility with Bank of Georgia, with a private developer, and it was constructed in 2014. It was commissioned in 2014, and recently, several years ago, it was acquired. The investor exited it, and it was acquired together with several similar facilities by Georgian Global Utilities. So that's why sort of I wanted to show that we are trying to reach to the smaller projects where other let's say IFIs like EBRD have problems to reach to. It is not. I don't want to say that it is easy for us to finance such projects, but at least we are trying to, and at the same time we're trying to maintain both technical, environmental, social, whatever standards are required by IFIs in financing of any projects in the renewable sector. Now, several words about the auction assignment. It was also mentioned by Nurzar, and just to give you a bit of a history about how and why the bank is involved in the auctions, and what is also somehow relates to what Georgi mentioned in his presentation about the next steps and the need to support development of renewables, further development of renewables in Georgia, because we see that in the last years this development is not, how to say, is not as good as we all of us would like to see. One of the ways to do it we see in a competitive auction schemes, and EBRD is supporting 20 auctions in 14 countries of operation, and main focus of these auctions is on solar and onshore wind projects. And one of the, let's say, recent conclusions on the recent auction in Uzbekistan for 100 megawatt wind capacity was a winning bid of $25.7 per megawatt hour per megawatt hour of generation. And it was just recently, auction was completed recently in September 21. With this slide gives example, shows how prices for renewable capacities throughout the last years were reduced and what was achieved through competitive application of competitive auction schemes in throughout the world. It is not focused only on EBRD countries of operation. And with this in mind, we together with Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development and the GDF are working on a auction to launch an auction for 50 megawatt of solar power plant, and hopefully Nuksar's expectation is that we will be able to do it by the end of this year or maybe early next year. A lot of work is done already, and the progress, let's say, on many fronts we have advanced substantially. There are some things related to support scheme where we need to reach an agreement, and hopefully this agreement will be reached, and we will be able to launch, actually GDF and Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development will be able to launch auction in the coming months. Another initiative that we are also supporting Ministry and Georgian Energy Development Fund is understanding of the technical, economic and regulatory viability for green hydrogen, for development of green hydrogen supply chain in Georgia. Green hydrogen is becoming very popular, and it gained interest pretty quickly. Last year, EU approved the hydrogen strategy. There is expectation that quite substantial capacity will be developed in the coming years, and by 2030, if I'm not mistaken, the expectation is that about up to 40 gigawatt of capacity will be operating on the market for production of hydrogen. Therefore, Georgian authorities addressed EBRD to support them in this, let's say, direction. And the bank, we are looking at it not only from the country perspective, but we're taking more regional view and looking at this potential, looking at the region for us is Central Asia, Caucasus, Turkey, then maybe North Africa as well. So this is sort of, we're trying to take a holistic approach and to see what is the potential there, and what can be a bankable project, what bankable project can be developed as a result of this study. It's too early to make any conclusions, but at this stage, a consultant is working, and let's see what will be the results. One of the important areas for us is cooperation, is memorandum on the cooperation on liberalization and digitalization of the commodities market in Georgia. This memorandum was signed recently in June or July this year between EBRD, Energy Community, Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, Georgian Oil and Gas Corporation, Georgian Gas Transportation Company. And it focuses on the establishment of the liquid commodity exchange, and that would be where it will be possible to trade multi commodities, not only gas but also other commodities, including green hydrogen. This initiative is fully supported by Energy Community, and it is in line with the government strategy as well to introduce competitive gas and other commodities markets. So this is very briefly what I wanted to mention. If you have any questions, I'm ready to respond. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I think the presentation demonstrates that portfolio of EBRD is significant in Georgia and has potential to grow even further, and which makes obviously investors also, not just policymakers, optimistic about it's sharing the risk of investing in energy sector with banks like yours. I think it's an important component of development of this area, of this industry. Mr. Will Fisher will be our next speaker, and Will has, as I mentioned earlier, global experience with energy generation business, but also he has some experience in Georgia, visited the country many times and knows Georgia well. So APR Energy doesn't have any ongoing projects in Georgia, but they are looking at Georgia, and I think his perspective will be very interesting for our meeting's perspective as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mamuka. And as you rightly point out, we don't have any operational assets in Georgia. So perhaps what I thought I'd do is put Georgia in sort of a global perspective. I think that perhaps as a foreign investor looking at the market there, kind of how it compares and contrasts with some of the other locations that we invest in. So just briefly, a little bit about us. APR was an offshoot of Alstom. That's the A in APR. We are an international power company. We've done about 5 gigawatts of generation in 35 countries around the world. So certainly, primarily emerging markets, but everywhere from Japan to Puerto Rico to Senegal, Bangladesh, all over the place. So I think what's nice for us is we do have a good sense of kind of how all of these markets operate and sort of what works and what doesn't in attracting foreign investment. We're basically the power subsidiary of Atlas Group, which is a New York listed large diversified industrial conglomerate which has interests in shipping and on ourselves as the power vertical. So I think the first thing about Georgia is just how incredible the potential is, right? I mean, if you look at the resource base in country, I mean, it is truly staggering, especially compared to the market, right? The hydro capacity in country is large and is untapped or largely untapped, both for run-of-river and reservoir. The wind potentiality in country is unbelievable. And you're basically a large wind tunnel going through the Caucasus. And then, relatively speaking, from a global perspective, the gas access that you have from BP and from Azerbaijan, puts gas at rates that are pretty reasonable in the global context. That combined with a pretty fast growing electrical market, especially compared to developing or developed markets where, demand growth is fairly flat. It's a very interesting place, to work. Combine that then with basically a regulatory regime that's sort of EU approved and kind of access into the EU market, direct access into Turkey, and then eventual and swappable access into basically Europe's most energy hungry region, in southeastern Europe, particularly Greece and these types of locations, which actually pair very nicely with the summer seasonality that you have in Georgia from the hydro assets. So certainly, I think if you kind of look at it just from a baseline, certainly there's quite a lot there. But what I think is particularly interesting is, if you look at sort of where the energy markets are going globally, I think it's a little bit different than kind of the way that people typically contemplate them. So with the tremendous penetration of renewables and as some of our other panelists correctly point out, the kind of ever falling costs of solar and wind, particularly onshore wind, I think you have a situation where variable generation capacity really is taking the lead more and more, right? So, for example, we operate a power station in South Australia, which basically is a fully peaking asset, really running not very much at all, but primarily as a backup generation asset because of just how much wind potential and solar potential has been pushed into that grid system. Similarly, we operate about 100 megawatts in California. Again, same situation, tremendous amount of solar capacity coming online that is really taking up the heavy lifting of really overall power demand. And I think that's basically a beautiful situation for our decarbonization efforts, right? That more and more of the dispatched power generation, the actual kilowatt that's produced, is coming from a renewable source. And again, Georgia, I think, is perfectly oriented to basically follow that trend, right? I mean, the focus now on wind. Again, being able to realize some of the additional hydro potential, I think, is particularly important. So I think kind of this scenario, we have kind of no true baseload capacity moving forward in many of these markets, right? So a lot of coal plants we're seeing come offline, combined cycle plants, which were expected to dispatch at 80, 90%, are really now being pushed down in the merit order and really being used as swing capacity, as mid-merit capacity, generating only 40, 50, 60% of the time. And I think that really changes the dynamic. And what I think is interesting for Georgia is it has this opportunity to basically kind of leapfrog its market if it embraces this new reality. And I think what will be interesting, again, from a foreign investor perspective, we do have all of these sort of beneficial trends moving, right? We have the introduction of the day-ahead market, which is being talked about. But I think really what is important is that basically there's a stance taken, right? Stability is what matters when you're trying to put hundreds of millions of dollars into a location, right? And even in the US, right, you have different models for electricity that work, right? There is the ERCOT model from Texas, you have the California structure, even in Florida, right? You have basically a vertically integrated utility. So there are all these different structures, but really what matters if you're trying to attract investment and add generation capacity and make a liquid market, right, is having a vision and sticking to that vision and basically convincing an investor that you're there and that those rules are going to continue on, right? And I think that's what's interesting, right? I mean, we've worked in markets where tremendous amounts of capacity has been added, and it's just a single buyer model, right? I mean, Bangladesh added 3,000 megawatts in less than a year based on effectively just a single buyer model with a vertically integrated utility. Similarly, right, you have liquid market structures in Philippines and most of the developed world where you can similarly add tremendous amounts of capacity if price signals are clear, right? And there are bankable counterparties. So I think that will be what is interesting is basically seeing the actual realization of the day ahead market. And then, I would say that's probably not far enough because it's sort of an intermediary type of a stance, right? Particularly when you're in a situation where you have variable generation that's coming in, it is extremely important to get to an hourly balancing type of arrangement. I think that there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly on the ancillary services for the country. I think that framework is still being sort of worked through. And in a situation where you have these variable generation sources, ancillary services having backup capacity, having reserve capacity that can spin up quite quickly is a particularly important enabling factor for developers in the wind space or developers in the hydro space to be able to really have dependable capacity and allow those renewables to take the heavy lifting. So I think the key, at least from my perspective as a prospective investor, is basically having the government set a direction, stick to it, and then if that's the case, I think the sky is the limit in terms of investment and new developments in country. Happy to speak through a bit, any additional comparisons that we can make. I think there are a number of particularly interesting comparisons, but certainly I think, like I said, lots of potential. So thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you. I think I also added more kind of flavor into this discussion with a global perspective, but also some of the expectations that investors will have in order for them to make long-term decisions for entering country. This is not a field, energy is not a field where you can recover your investments very quickly. So you have to have a long-term commitment to country and long-term commitment to and believe in system that will generate enough return on capital for investors to take risk and invest. But you are right that market conditions are good. Market is there. Resources are there. Now it's a challenge is to create a system that brings these two, in a sense, together and brings investments that justify make sure that returns justify investments. Now it's my great pleasure to ask Therese to talk to us about her views on Georgian energy security and put it in a regional context a little bit. And it's good to have scholar at the panel as well. Too many practitioners around.
That's seldom a complaint we hear in energy. So I want to talk today. I want to bring together a lot of what people said, and I want to actually start with a point that Will made, and that is that government policy drives these investments and issues in very important ways. Excuse me. And if we look at the Georgian history, one of the surprising things about Georgia and energy security is it is one of the few countries in the world that put energy very visible in its national security strategies. And in the first and second strategies, Georgia laid out very clear energy priorities to the international community, to the international security community. And if we look at the different eras of Georgian energy security priorities, what we see is that the government sets a really clear standard for a number of years and then moves on to fill a new problem that they see. So if we look at what happened in the very first national security strategy, this is the period that Rusadan was talking about. The Baku-Supsa was coming into full use. Georgia was putting a huge diplomatic and security priority on completing the new pipelines. And with the completion of those pipelines, Georgia shifted its dependence from being on Russia to being on Azerbaijan. So in that first era, it was very much about establishing Georgia as a transit state and reducing Georgian imports. And then as we see reflected in the national strategy of 2011, the priority shifted to maximum exploitation of hydropower and physical strengthening of the grid. And these were both financed by foreign direct investment. We heard a lot of projects, excuse me, from David about projects that the EBRD was involved in, from Nuskar about the priorities that the government had in that time. And then in 2016, finalizing in 2017, Georgia made what we must acknowledge is a very unusual choice to join the energy acquis. And with the joining of the acquis, a lot of things in Georgia did change. And that predictability that Will is looking for became moved to a much more European standard. We all tend to speak as if everyone understands the acquis, but there are a few points about the acquis that are worth noting. And that is that, as those of you who have worked closely with Europe know, doing these kind of acquis was mandatory to join the European Union. And so the energy acquis was one of 35 sets of rules. And Georgia joined, when Georgia joined in 2017, not only is it not physically connected to any other community member state, it is also very unusual in that it is beginning harmony with European legislation in energy. And this decision was taken partly to get that predictability, but it was also taken because a lot of folks in Georgia felt very clearly that to force transparency into the sector, to really bring it to European standards, that the admiration for the European Union was going to be really useful in restructuring energy. And so Georgia undertook commitments, obligations to put into place laws that would otherwise have been very difficult to move forward. And Georgia took beyond its own control some of the requirements and regulations for the future of its energy sector. And under the acquis, Georgia is committed to marketizing the sectors, unbundling electricity into generation, transmission, and distribution, engaging in transboundary trade of electricity, generating more from renewable sources, and establishing strategic reserves. And those set the markers for what Georgia needed to do next. Georgia's made really remarkable progress in all of these aspects of energy security, but so far today, no one has mentioned the most intractable problem for Georgia. And I think that we have to at least speak about this in passing, and that is, of course, Nguri. Now, I just want to remind you that hydropower supplied 75% of Georgia's domestically produced electricity in 2019. And 67% of all of its electricity. So even though Georgia was increasingly importing, hydro was the most important piece of it. And Nguri is still the anchor of Georgia's grid. This facility is 32% of all of Georgia's installed capacity, and it is almost 60% of Georgia's hydropower capacity. As you all know, it is the cheapest source of electricity. It helps keep the price of electricity in Georgia affordable for citizens. It is very important in reducing energy poverty, but it is managed. It is managed by negotiation with the de facto government of Abkhazia because the power facility is in Abkhaz-controlled territory. And the standing agreement that's been in place since 1997 is that Abkhazia receives 40% of the electricity produced, and the Republic of Georgia proper receives 60%. And this has been a huge problem. It's been a problem when there are crises. EBRD, as David noted, has been very involved in some of the necessary renovations, but it's been difficult and controversial because of the status of this facility being stretched between two different controls of territory. So when there are crises, like when the tunnel had to be assessed or when the tunnel had to be repaired, sometimes the crisis is simply how do we get replacement electricity and who is responsible? And that whole set of challenges has persisted. It is worth noting that Vardnili, the upper cascade piece, the large facility you see on this map, has been renovated and is fully producing. The three smaller downstream facilities are still in consideration of whether they can be constructed. They were completely looted during the wars. But all of that area is in Abkhaz-controlled territory. And so what I want to remind you of is that while Nguri is the #1 anchor in Georgia's grid, Vardnili is the #2 anchor in the Georgian grid. And so what we see is that there are a lot of hidden costs. There's a lot of political controversy over investment, and this facility is more at risk. Demand is expanding, the grid is expanding. This remains the largest piece of the grid, and it does remain at risk. And that's why I want to turn our attention now to the big question about Georgian energy security. Typically, we, among scholars, either divide energy security into 3 main buckets or 4. And I'm going to talk about 4 because I think it does justice to the complexity of Georgia. Every state wants energy that is reliable, affordable, and environmentally friendly, but nations tend to shift over time how they prioritize these 3. And nations like Georgia that have a huge problem with sources that threaten the state or its values have a 4th challenge. And I just want you to think about the fact that reliability, the desire to ensure that supply would be continuous, is why Georgia was very generous with purchasing power agreements and very aggressive in searching foreign direct investment in hydropower. Reliability is why everyone wants to emphasize domestic hydropower. And the need for reliability gave GSC a decades-long focus on grid stability and redundancy. All of those things cost money. And the desire for affordability, Georgia has tried to move to the EC market system in the hopes that in the long term, that will make energy more competitive and more affordable. But it's also why Georgia persists in using social gas the way that it does. Energy poverty is defined as how much of a household's income goes toward keeping the lights on. We want energy to pay for itself, but how do we help households? The social gas problems in Georgia, which are relatively complex, are about trying to keep energy affordable. The very controversial deal in 2019 with Gazprom had to do with wanting to make sure that there was some competition that would keep gas affordable. And so there have been a lot of tensions as Georgia tried to keep energy affordable. The current emphasis is now environmental friendliness. That was historically underemphasized. Georgia already used hydropower, so it was already relatively green. But as controversies have risen about new hydropower in Georgia, as awareness has risen that your use of biomass in Georgia is unsustainable and needs to be reduced, Georgia has adopted the efficiency law, has adopted the renewable energy law, compelling the grid operator to become very renewable friendly, which it wasn't always, because if you focus very much on reliability of a grid, you might not be very welcoming to intermittent renewables. But once you change those priorities, you have to make room for it. As we think about those three priorities, there's also, I think, the extremely important issue about reducing dependence on sources that threaten the Georgian state or its values. And I would emphasize the fact that when Georgia looks at this quadrant, it's a temptation to think that it's always about Russia, that it should only be about Russia. But as we move forward, and Georgia becomes a more and more European-style market economy, there's another set of concerns. Georgia has to address transparency and continuously reduce corruption in the sector and continually ensure that portions of the sector are not captured by separate interests. Georgia has to look at incorporation of rural communities and integration of their concerns so that it does not increasingly alienate ethnic minorities, in this case, the High Mountain, Swan, and other communities, as it pursues energy security. So really, Georgia is continuously having to rebalance across these four. And this is a really exciting time for Georgia, because after several decades of getting much better at ensuring the two in the upper two quadrants, the bottom two have now become the focus of policy. And I think that's really promising. And I think that's really exciting. And I think when we listen to the enthusiasm that we just heard from this panel about the next generation of renewable energy, when we listen to this panel about the kind and complexity of markets that Georgia is moving towards, what's really exciting about energy security in Georgia is that a fundamental set of challenges that really did challenge the survival of the state have been addressed in an effective enough way that Georgia can now move on to the next level of energy security challenges. And with that, Mamuka, I'm really eager to hear what questions there are.
Actually, we are almost like out of time. So we have like 12 minutes left. And first of all, I just wanted to comment that Swans are guardians of Georgian heritage and culture. They are more Georgians than any other Georgians, probably. And but they definitely have a distant community in the high mountains, and they definitely need special treatment there because of many different reasons that we won't mention here. But what I would suggest at this point is that I think this subject and this panel definitely requires follow-up discussions, and we're not going to end this topic discussion right now. But I would like to make sure that each of the panel participants has at least 1 minute right now about just to do the follow-up on what we discussed so far. And if we are left with some time, then we'll take care of the questions from the audience. But Nugzar, why don't we start like 1 minute comment on what you've heard from others and what is from your perspective like significant next steps in this process of evolving energy security of Georgia?
Thank you, Mamuka. As I correctly understand that for everyone, it's clear that we have to go on in the reform processes and meet EU directives, and it will really help Georgia to become more energy, how to say, to increase the energy security level in Georgia and somehow attract more investment in this field. So being very close to EU's regulations will clearly make better environmental for investment in Georgia's energy sector. And also, there are many other challenges which were highlighted, but I think that the main thing is that to think about the future and to continue the reform of our energy sector.
Thank you, Nugzar. I think this is a strategic decision which governments usually take and based on kind of political environment. But whatever strategic decision is made, okay, one decision may be integration with EU. There may be some alternative decisions as well in terms of what is best for attracting more investments, maybe what is best for bringing more private sector interest in the country. And I'm sure there are people who would argue with the choice of Georgia being with the European Union regulation because it brings so much burden on country, but at the same time it brings predictability and stability. So that's a kind of trade-off that countries need to make. But your point well taken. I think that's a strategy at this point. And commenting on what Will said earlier, Georgia needs to stick whatever the decision will be made. Rusudan, your point next. So what do you think is the...
Thank you. Yeah. So having listened to all of the presenters today, what I take from it is that, first of all, Georgia is evolving. Georgia is developing its strategy to become more independent in terms of energy and to be more secure in terms of energy. However, and I think we are moving into the right direction because that is where the world is moving. We are looking at the renewables. We're looking to diversify our energy base. We're changing the legislation. We're doing lots of things. I mean, having listened to all of the presenters, there is a lot happening in the country, but at the same time, I also see some challenges which, in my opinion, have to be addressed. For example, just a couple of examples. When we were talking about countries' appetite to pursue production of green hydrogen, I have a question, where does the energy come from that green hydrogen? Because we're in deficit for 10 months during the year. So that's the question. There was no answer to this, but again, this is something that would be a challenge for the country. Again, developing renewable sources of energy like solar, wind. This is very good, but these require many years to come into fruition. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. So project cycles are quite long. So I mean, what are we doing in this regard? How we're going to fill in the deficit which we're having currently? So there are lots of things. Even the legislation which is being developed, I mean, it has, there is still a room to go. There's something, I mean, it's not finalized, but there is a lot to be done in terms of creating the system that everyone was talking about. Also, the grid capacity, is it able to take these variable sources of energy currently? What's being done in this regard? It would have been good to have also somebody from I think it's Georgia energy system or electric energy system who is looking after the grid, to hear their perspective as well. But I believe that at the next conference or at the next meeting, we will be able to hear from them as well to talk about, maybe to answer some questions about the challenges. So there is a lot happening in right directions, but there is a lot to do, a lot more to think about to make this system to work. That's my recollection from this conversation.
Thank you, Sudan. Definitely this type of discussions usually do not solve the problems. This type of discussion usually raise questions.
Yeah,
for
material
those,
for thought.
Yeah, and let me move now to Georgi for the sake of time. Georgi, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank all participants, speakers for excellent presentations and putting up the key issues for the development. So from my point of view and from Georgia Global Utilities perspective, it's a very good time for investment, meaning that demand is outpacing the supply and the gap is persisting and it will continue to stay here. So before the market liberalization happens and the market liquidity increases, we would be in favor of the government motivating and putting some stimulus for investments like the power purchase agreement. It was a vehicle through which we were able to raise funds internationally from international banks. Until we managed to introduce a significant amount of installed capacity, I assume that the government should continue to put some incentives similar to PPA or any other incentive schemes to allow us to raise capital for investments. And I assume that the market liberalization would allow the market liquidity to increase, and in some foreseeable future, it may not be, the need may not be there for the guaranteed offload arrangements. However, before that happens and before the free market stabilizes and the liquidity increases, I assume the only way to proceed and install the new capacities is through the stimulus.
Thank you, Georgi. Very helpful, I think. And David, maybe just try to squeeze it in 1 minute if you can.
Yes, sure, will do my best. Maybe just quickly to summarize, I think Georgia is, in terms of the energy strategy, is now at crossroad. I'm very proud that I participated in supporting financing of more than 450 megawatt of greenfield capacity in this country, mainly hydro. Going forward, there is a lot of capacity that can be developed in hydro, wind and solar in this country. Just to respond maybe to Rusudan's question, wind and solar are much easier and quicker to construct to meet the deficit needs. Hydro requires longer time period, several years. Run-of-the-river hydros can be constructed quicker, but reserve hydros with reservoirs, it's 5+ years. Country actually now needs to shift to the next gear, let's put it that way, in order to stimulate the next step of capacity development in the country. And I fully agree with Georgi that market fundamentals are there, but there is a need at this stage, crucial need for the support, clear support mechanism that will give visibility to investors and to financiers about the long-term, to raise long-term financing for the projects. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Teresa? There are lots of comments on your obviously very interesting angle that you covered on Abkhazia, and we know lots of consumption of electricity is taking place on Abkhazian side of the mostly generating cryptocurrencies and so forth, and that takes most of the electricity produced from Anguri to that direction. But maybe a little summary of everything else that we've heard today.
Sure. I think that Georgian demand is going to continue to grow because Georgia is still dramatically below the OECD per capita consumption. But I do think that there is a moment now for the Georgian government to help shape that consumption. Since a lot of the consumption, particularly the summer consumption, is in air conditioning and is connected to tourism, since a lot of the consumption increase, not only in Abkhazia, but also in Georgia, is connected to cryptocurrency, energy efficiency standards and government preferences for what are the highest priority reforms, I think are really important. Georgia has an opportunity to build a system that is more rational than many existing European systems, rather than to build an irrational system and then try to fix it. And we know, for example, that cryptocurrency all over the world is unnaturally attracted to countries with cold climates and underpriced electricity. There are tools that other states have found to sort of manage this. I do think that this demand issue is an important one. And I do think that it combines nicely with encouraging the kind of investments that you want. Georgia is probably going to have to move toward some policies that push the citizens a little bit harder towards that efficiency in all different sectors. And the base law exists. Finding cost-effective ways to help implement energy efficiency, I think, is a really big priority for Georgia. And I think that evangelization of charging for electricity is essential in Abkhazia. Abkhazia consumes more than Tbilisi, which is ridiculous given the population disparity. That's going to be a difficult puzzle to unpack, but there are some ways in which Georgia can lead the way with good efficiency standards, ideas, and pricing practices.
Thank you. Probably we should dedicate one discussion about this subject. Will, sorry, I didn't give you the word, but 1 minute for you.
I appreciate it. No, I fully agree. I think Nguri is a very important thing to talk about, not only just because of the demand that Abkhazia has and unraveling that, but Nguri is also is basically the primary regulating reserve for the whole country, right? And as you start sticking additional intermittency into the system, having the ability to dispatch on a second-by-second basis becomes more and more important. So the leverage that the Abkhaz have continues to increase. So I think the key is get out in front of these issues, create clear incentives, and drive the kind of change that you want, because there are people who are ready to invest, but clarity and sticking to both transparency in terms of anti-corruption measures, but also transparency in terms of messaging and sticking to what you're saying you want to do, I think is tremendously important to build investor confidence. So, but I think the future is bright, and it's a very exciting time to be looking at Georgia. Thank
you, Will. This is always fault of moderator when speakers run out of time, and so we have not covered all the issues that in depth probably. But this is a very large subject. Probably going forward, we should divide this conversation into 2 or 3, maybe multiple subjects of conversation. I would like to ask all to commit to future meetings like this and conversations like this, because this is, I think, important subject for not just our organization or your businesses, but it's a very important subject for Georgia itself. And recent Georgian history was definitely shaped by energy developments, whether it was pipeline projects initially, and then its relationship with the neighbors and energy security in general as a factor for Georgia's development. So I would like to thank to all of our speakers for your wonderful presentations and knowledge and contribution. I would like to apologize for those participants whose questions I didn't raise to our participants, but photograph them and I'll ask them to respond later, maybe by emails. And also we have to mention that today is a Veterans Day in the United States, and I would like to wish happy Veterans Day to all the veterans in United States and in Georgia and elsewhere. And wish you all a wonderful day in US and wonderful evening in Georgia and elsewhere. And again, thanks to the audience for participating. And we'll let you know about our future meetings, and good luck with your lives.
Thank you.